Yeah, so the first one really started. So I was looking at the suburbs, so the nicer parts of town where, I was just looking at a single family home or a condo. And for whatever reason, I spent a lot of time on Craigslist. I bought and sold a lot of cars just out of my personal passion. So spent a lot of time on Craigslist and stumbled across the real estate section and was looking at just real estate, happened to find one that was 3 units. It was fully occupied, cash flowing, and it was for a fraction of the price of these other properties that I was looking at in the suburbs. So it just didn't make sense to me. One, you get it for a fraction of the price, and then two, the rental income is multiples higher. So it was just like tenfold. And so I checked it out and it just made sense on paper. And at that point, I had seen maybe dozens of homes, dozens of condos, and financially they eked out. They barely made the mark. Whereas this one, it just blew it out of the water. So I said, all right, let me go ahead and do this. And the acquisition side, I thought I could finance this thing. It wasn't too much. I thought I could finance it, but no, it was commercial real estate and it was in the city of Detroit. Those are two,
Banks don't want to lend
absolute
on
no's.
that.
No, absolutely not. So I had to pay for it in cash. So I scraped up every penny that I had and made the purchase. And that was my first deal.
I love that you found a good deal. And when you find a good deal, you went all in on it, right? A lot of times
Hmm.
people are like, oh, it didn't work out. Shucks, it was a
Right.
great deal. Well, no, really, like you just figured out a way to get it done. Um, and then I know you've now purchased a lot of companies and you sold a lot of companies, and you've kind of made this full circle path into buying companies, selling companies, and then getting back into it. So, why go down this path to begin with? You're in real estate. Tell us about some of these first transactions, and how did you get down this path of buying a company?
Yeah. So with the real estate, which I guess going back to the cars, that it really started on Craigslist, buying all those cars just out of personal passion. I love cars, and then the real estate, and I got my feet wet with all those acquisitions. I loved finding those properties. I loved negotiating. I loved the contracts. I loved the transition, and I think the commercial real estate was for me a better segue into the businesses because all my tenants were businesses. So I love to help them. I love to get, their permits, their licenses, their books in order sometimes if they needed that. Whatever my tenants needed, I would be there for them. So that really got me into the business side where, another day I was stumbling on Craigslist and saw a club for sale. I saw a pizza shop. I saw a restaurant in the businesses for sale section of Craigslist, and was just really that just really got me engaged because I saw that the cash flow was pretty significant in relative to the purchase price. And because back in the day, you could buy these for a 1x, a 2x, a 3x. And so it just didn't make sense to me. Why would I not buy this business that's cash flowing so well as opposed to the real estate? So that's what got me hooked initially. And then um, I just said, you know what, I'm not going to want, I just don't want to work on some of these businesses with other partners, because they've got cold feet. They can't negotiate. They don't look at the operating agreement or the contracts as thoroughly as I do, or they're not putting as much down as I am, and yet they want the same equity. Whatever it was, it just didn't seem fair, or it just didn't make sense. So I said, let me go and do it on my own. And that very first deal was a sports bar for me. So it was owned by a Hall of Famer, hockey player on the Red Wings. Bought it right next to the hockey arena, and I've never drank in my life, so I didn't know anything about what I was putting on the menu or the pricing or what I was buying. None of that. I did not get a single bartender. So in the transition, I just had zero transition support, seller support, and for a guy that doesn't know anything about the industry. So I bought the thing, didn't use any lawyers. I went through the entire liquor license process by myself and opened up the place, bought a bunch of stuff that I thought people would drink based on some old documents that I could dig up from the prior owner. And then I was begging around for bartenders. And I did a soft open, and an hour before I opened, one guy stumbles in. He's like, hey, boss, I can help you out. And so this was somebody, again, I found on Craigslist, responded to a little ad that I put out. And I just learned about the POS system. I just learned about the beer and the alcohol that was coming in. Some was coming in late, and another lady showed up. She was referred. She was referred over to or from another bar. So from another buddy that had a bar. So I just met these people, and these are the people that are going to be running my bar for the day. We got slammed, absolutely slammed that day. So it was the biggest night still to date since I ran the bar. On my first night was my opening night. We were slammed for the actual day part of it, and then the night part, I hosted a party, brought in the DJ and everything, and people came in limos. They were dressed up, and this is just a picture of this bar. This is a dirty, old, grimy, hole-in-the-wall sort of bar. And this is not a place where you drive up in a limo or wear a suit too. So it was just, it was a heck of a first night. But
so did you not get anything in the transition? You're like, no employees came through with it. Like they all just quit. Or like that's crazy that they wouldn't want to continue on either, right?
Yeah. And I was begging those guys to come through, but they were just pretty pissed off and the way that the seller had handled it, and that they were not notified beforehand. And so they were ticked off, and they said, you know what, we're done with this thing. And so I was left there kind of stranded by myself. And that's something that I, in hindsight, should have probably negotiated or should have asked for, or should have put down on paper, or whatever I can to mitigate that. But yeah, I didn't get anybody. I didn't have much documentation. And so it was kind of blindly going into this thing where I didn't know much about the industry whatsoever.
That's hilarious. I guess that's why you didn't pay very much for it, right?
Right.
So you bought your sports bar. At what point were you able to separate yourself from the operations? Like, did you get a manager, or were you the manager for 3 months? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So while I was doing all this, only up till about 3 years ago, I still had a day job. So during this entire process, I would be on the phone at work, taking calls with the liquor commission, with the broker, with the with the different vendors or the bartender or whoever it was, or even driving down to the facility because my contractor would be there and he was doing renovations. And so I would be going in, once or twice a day during business hours, like during work hours, and pretending I had a doctor's note or lunch, whatever it was. And then afterwards at 5 o'clock, I'd be going down there and taking care of the rest of the work. So it was pretty tough at the beginning, but the way I always do it is I spend 3 to 6 months on the business as much as I can to understand it, put the systems in place, and then to kind of ease off and let the folks really get in and run the show themselves. So luckily, one of the bartenders that I had hired, he showed some promise, he had some expertise, and he was the biggest thing. I could trust him. And so he really took over the main head bartender / manager responsibilities. And I had cameras in there, all my finances, the POS system was on my phone, forming an application, so I could see the visibility on any given day. And my opening night, so this was right next to our Red Wings arena, which is our NHL team. And on opening night, that entire week, I was in Mexico for work. So my biggest 3 games of the year, or pretty much opening weekend, I was not there physically. So I had, I had everything in place. I had all the notes, all the instructions. If this happens, you can do this. You can always give me a call. And so I was there pretty much all evening up till, early hours of the morning on my phone, watching the webcam and just seeing the video and how the business is doing, and my phone with the POS applications and the financials. So it took about 2 to 3 months to get to that point. And before then, I was opening, I was closing, and you're talking about closing a bar at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. at night, and you're going home, cleaning the place up, and then waking up for work the very next morning. So I did that for a few months, and then slowly was able to transition off.
listeners have got to be thinking you're crazy, right? Like you're doing the math on this. It's like you bought a bar, you'd never been in the bar industry, no employees came with it, and you had a day job the whole time. You're doing this full build out, and you're literally out of town for the biggest 3 days of the year for you with your NHL games. You're not even there, and you don't even have employees an hour before you're supposed to launch, right? And open, and somehow some guy shows up from Craigslist and says, "I'm here, boss."
Right. Yeah, it sounds crazy now, but back then it just seemed normal, to me. So.
Oh man, that's amazing. And so, do you still have that bar? Did you sell it? What's kind of to wrap that story in full circle? Where's that bar now?
Yeah, so I sold that off. It was an investor from China who needed a green card. So through the EB